Old Testament today. We're going to talk about something that is found in Daniel chapter 3. We're going to talk about three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But before we do that, I'm going to show you something. So I've got this piece of paper. I got some forceps. I'm going to hold it up here like this, right? And I'm going to put it on fire. Okay? What happens when you light a piece of paper on fire? It burns, doesn't it? It burns up pretty soon. As you watch it, it's gone, right? So that's what fire does. Fire destroys things and fire burns things up. But I have something I want to show you, because I'm going to take this piece of paper here, I'm going to put it in this liquid in this jar, in this cup. Okay, I'm going to squeeze it out, get a lot of the liquid out. Okay, I'm going to set the cup down. I'm going to take my forceps again. And I'm going to hold this up so you can see it. Okay, here's the paper. I'm going to hold it up. I've dipped it in that liquid. I want you to watch. Okay, you watching? Here you go. Look at all those flames. Wow. Well, when I put it in the water like this and hold it up, it's still there, right? It didn't burn up. Even with all those flames, it didn't burn up. Well, that's a science experiment. But today we're going to talk about a miracle. We'll talk about a miracle that God performed with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in a thing called a fiery furnace. So let's learn the lesson, and then we'll talk about what it means to us in a little bit. Hang on. Hey kids, quick little warning. Mr. Charlie just did a science experiment using fire. You all aren't allowed to play with fire. If you want to do science experiments, get your mommy or daddy to help you, but don't let Mr. Charlie hear about anybody who watched this video playing with fire. It's not safe. We love you guys. We don't want you to get hurt. So remember, what did I say? Don't play with fire. Now let's learn about the fire furnace and how God deals with that. Today we're going to be talking about the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the miracle God performed by saving them from the fires. King Nebuchadnezzar was the powerful ruler of the vast Babylonian Empire. Within the royal court were people of many different nations and customs, people who had been conquered and then chosen to help King Nebuchadnezzar rule his empire. One day, King Nebuchadnezzar summoned the rulers of various provinces to gather together. He watched them assemble from his royal pavilion. This was a special occasion, and no one would dare not come. The king stood up. The great moment had arrived. Trumpeters sounded a fanfare, and the herald, whose job it was to make royal announcements, stepped forward with a big scroll in his hand. The captains, princes, and governors all stood quietly, waiting to hear the announcement from the king. All people, nations, and languages hear the king's command, the herald announced. Then he went on to say that the king had made a gigantic statue in his own likeness. The statue was 90 feet, 30 meters tall, and was made of gold. This was to be their god. At the sound of musical instruments, everyone was to bow down and worship the golden image. The next thing they heard put fear in the hearts of the bravest man. Anyone who does not fall down and worship the image of the king shall immediately be thrown into a fiery furnace. So when the musical instruments played, the people fell down and worshiped the golden statue, just as the king had commanded. The Chaldeans were worshiping close together when they saw something that caught their attention, and they looked very carefully to make sure they saw what they saw. Look, the Chaldean said, it's just as we thought. The three of them, see, they're not bowing down. They're refusing to worship the golden image. The Chaldeans were right. Three young princes, the rulers of the capital city itself, were openly disobeying the king. The three men had been brought as captives from the distant land of Judah. Their names had been changed, but because of their abilities, they had been given high positions in the kingdom. Hananiah, meaning beloved of God, was called Shadrach. Mishael, cherished name, was changed from one who is like God to the heathen name Meshach. And Azariah, whose name meant the Lord is my helper, came to be known as Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar may have changed their names, but their hearts remained the same. These men believed in the Lord God Almighty, and to bow down before an image was something that God had told them never, ever to do. The Chaldeans lost no time in reporting what they had seen to the king. They were jealous of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they slyly reminded the king that these men who had refused to bow down were the very men the king had placed over the affairs of Babylon. "How dare these men disobey me?" shouted the king. "Bring them here at once." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were hurried to the royal pavilion. And when the king asked them if it was true that they had not bowed down to the golden images, they told him, yes, it was true. So the proud and mighty ruler of the Babylonian Empire decided to give them a second chance to bow down to the image. If they did, he would forgive them. The brave young men replied, "Our God is able to deliver us, but even if he chooses not to, we will never serve your gods or worship your golden image." The king was furious. He commanded the furnaces to be heated up 7 times hotter. And he ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be taken to the furnace and to be thrown in for their willful disobedience. It wasn't long before the furnace was made 7 times hotter than it usually was. Then one by one they were thrown into the midst of the furnace. Shadrach was thrown into the flames. Meshach was hurled into the furnace, and Abednego was thrown in to join them. When the soldiers had thrown them in the furnace, they turned to run away from the terrible heat. And then the king saw something that made him jump to his feet. He could not believe his eyes. Forgetting about his dignity, the king ran with the rest of the people to get a better look. "Look," shouted the king, "do you see what I see? Didn't I throw 3 men who were bound into the flames? I see 4, and they are loose, and they're walking around. How is that possible? And who is that 4th man?" King Nebuchadnezzar knew in his heart that the Lord God Almighty was the true and living God, and that he had sent and came down to rescue Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the king called forth, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out of the fire." The people were amazed as the 3 Hebrew boys walked out of the furnace unharmed. Not a single hair was singed. They didn't even smell like smoke. King Nebuchadnezzar fell to his knees and cried, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has delivered his servants who trusted him." Shortly afterwards, a new decree was read to all the nations under Nebuchadnezzar's rule. No one was to speak against the God of the 3 brave Jewish men. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were promoted to higher places within the kingdom, but their real happiness was in their freedom to worship God. Thank you to the Moody Publishers for these free images that we were able to use to tell the story tonight of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And thank you to our Father for providing us this story in the Old Testament in Genesis chapter 3. Wow, what an amazing story from the Old Testament. Can you imagine being thrown into a fiery furnace and God comes down and saves you and you walk out of the flames and you don't even have a singed hair, you don't even smell like smoke because God saved you? but you were thrown in there because you were obedient to God and not to a king or to somebody who tried to get you to do something wrong. That happens all the time with us. People want us to do things that we're not supposed to do. They try to get us to do things that we're not supposed to do. And sometimes our friends say, if you don't do this, I'm not going to be your friend. Well, guess what? If it's disobedient to God, you need not do it. Even if you lose a friend, you don't do what they want you to do. We must obey God before we listen to anybody else. If God says not to do it, we shouldn't do it. And sometimes we have to face the consequences. Sometimes we may lose a friend. Sometimes we may make somebody mad. Sometimes it just doesn't work out the way we would like it to work out because we were obedient to God. But guess what? God's with us before, during, and after. And he will always be faithful and present with us going through all these things. We can believe in God no matter what happens. We can believe in him because he is with us. But we have to remember that we have to obey him regardless. Hope you liked the lesson. Pretty cool miracle. Hope you liked the science experiment. We'll see you soon and we'll learn some more about God's will for us. Until next time, bye-bye.